The opinions expressed on the following audio program are solely those of the host and the guests. Burner Podcast is an independently produced, not-for-profit show and is not associated with the Burning Man organization or its subsidiaries. The views expressed are not representative of the entire Burning Man community and are presented here for entertainment purposes only. In short, calm the fuck down. It's just a podcast.
All right, it's episode number 44, and it is 333 days till the man burns as of this recording. You know, I kind of want to come up with some sort of an acronym for what life was like before and how it changed after the discovery of this community, like a BCAD type thing. I know it's not the most original thought in the world, but I'm pretty sure like everybody kind of agrees. Most people agree. It's not like you change into a completely new person all of a sudden, but there is this before burner world and after your first sort of burn or festival type experience. It's a very common story. And you kind of get to watch these changes unfold on people's social media. You know, like little by little, their photos get funnier and a little dustier, and people get a little nakeder in their profile pictures. And you see like the likes on your posts increasing like fucking exponentially because all of a sudden people are way more supportive of you trying new things that might not, you know, completely be normal. And you feel amazing and on top of the world, and then like every once in a while something from your past life reaches into this new life, and it's either congruent with this current you or it's like these tentacles trying to pull you back. Could be like a family member or an ex, and they poke you and set off some trigger you didn't even know you had hidden away underneath that sparkly pink tutu. But you know, rub some dust on it and move on. I'm dealing with a little bit of that at this exact moment. It's like that spy movie where like the main character is retired on a beach somewhere, and this cryptic them find him. Anyway, that's a whole rabbit hole I'm not going to go down right now. But this general before and after this community thing, it's a thing that's been talked about quite a bit on this show and in a lot of our conversations. It's a thing that's at the forefront of my thoughts right now. And it happens to be a theme in today's interview. I've been wanting to do a show on gender and sexuality for some time. And the perfect opportunity popped up when I saw that my friend, Adam Powers, had posted that he was looking for questions that people might have about being trans. So I took that as a sign and ran with it. And on today's show, we're going to have a chat about gender, sexuality, and how the two dance together. Gender and sexuality being a thing that is a common subject of exploration and play in the burner community. It's been long overdue to have a show about that particular subject. So I sat down with Adam and Kara, both of whom are community organizers here in San Diego. That's probably like the best way to describe them, in my opinion. To get into some basic 101 type stuff like we often do on this show, and then kind of see where the conversation goes from there. How it goes off the rails, as executive producer Meg and I usually joke. Adam and Kara are both a great resource and are able to speak on these subjects with great eloquence. And we're also both super candid about their own life experiences. So I found this chat that you're about to hear to be very healing for me on a personal level. So without further ado, this is our boys don't necessarily have a penis and girls don't necessarily have a vagina episode. This is, of course, an intro to that subject. I'm looking forward to future shows where we're going to get like way more in depth about all the different corners of this deep and fascinating issue. But today's episode is entitled God in Drag. That's a Ram Dass reference, by the way. I mistakenly said it was Osho like at some point during the interview. I'm a terrible hippie. Anyway, I go by Mr. Arash. Mr. I just never really thought about how funny that is. I go by Mr. Arash even though nobody calls me Mr. Maybe good for today's show. Welcome to Burner Podcast.
was looking at all the life. There were plants and birds and rocks and things. There was sand and hills and rain. The first thing I met was the fly with the balls and the sky with no clouds. The heat was hot and the ground was dry, but the air was full of sound. I've been through the desert on a horse with no name, and it felt good to be out of the rain. In the desert, you can't remember your name, 'cause there ain't no one for to give you no name.
So like if one person sort of has a certain kind of experience, like the gaps. Yeah. So either way, like now we're recording. Now we're officially recording. But just to sort of like recap on a bit of what we were touching on earlier. When we do these kinds of roundtables, I want to get into the things that people are a little embarrassed to ask about. And the reason for that is, this is completely my general experience and perception, and feel free to chime in on this. I feel like with a lot of the people that we tend to have in our social circles, they're going to first and foremost just be like, okay, here are my human friends. And they're not thinking so far as about like, okay, here's the detail, here's skin color, here's gender, here's like, and that's I think what connects a lot of our social circles together. But when we do learn more about the other person, we tend to run with a lot of like very analytical people who like to dissect a lot of information. And I imagine it's kind of like you can go look at a painting at a museum and appreciate the aesthetic beauty of it and be like, okay, well, here's this beautiful painting. But then if you learn more about how the painter painted it, it becomes even more interesting and beautiful. So a lot of this show is, I imagine, revolves around getting into the brushstrokes, if you will.
I like that.
If that makes sense.
I like that, absolutely.
Okay. So I'm going to have each of you introduce yourselves and give a quick background about yourself and how gender and gender studies is a topic of interest to you and how it has become an interest to you so that the listeners can get used to your voices. Cool. Start.
I'm Kara. I think about gender 24/7, both in my personal life and professionally. So I am a fourth year PhD student at UCSD in theater, but I'm writing my dissertation, fingers crossed, about gender and about cross-dressing on stage and what that means. Why do we like it? Why, historically, why is that titillating, or why is it exciting, or why is it threatening to different societies at different times? So I think about gender a lot. I'm also genderqueer myself, so I think about gender a lot.
Why did you choose that paper topic?
Because I think about gender a lot. No, because I discovered in a class accidentally, just in a footnote, a reference to some play from 1691. And I read this play about a woman who is living as a man in 1691. And so much of what that was expressed by that character is stuff that I think of as 1990s feminism.
Yeah. And
so that kind of piqued my interest and why I wanted to learn more about what they were thinking in the 1690s about gender.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by 90s feminism?
So the notion that gender is what you do and how you do, not what you are. So this was a character who had become super adept at portraying a man, at fencing, at flirting with women. And the character says, I study gender and I could be just as much of a man as any of the men who are, born in a male body.
What's the name of the play?
The name of the play is Sir Anthony Love.
Sir Anthony Love.
Not fuck.
Wow.
Sir Anthony Love. And nobody has heard of it. It's forgotten by history. It was like a little footnote. There's like a page and a half in the one book from 25 years ago. And I unearthed it, and it was last published in the 1980s.
That's fascinating. Okay. Okay. All right. So, okay. Adam, introduce yourself. And your
Yeah,
background.
I'm Adam Powers. I use they, them, or she, her pronouns. I also think about gender 24/7, although not quite professionally, so you could say I'm a gender enthusiast. I came out
Hobbyist?
Yeah, hobbyist. A gender hobbyist. I came out to myself as trans about 2 years ago, and part of that experience, I think, for a lot of people whom that happens to, is just a lot of reading and a lot of thinking and a lot of deconstructing. And once you start, you kind of can't stop. So it started to infiltrate my life. I do community liaison and community development currently for a job, and that I also do community organizing with organizing polyamory events, both of which with Kara. And so those two things have started to meld together. I've started to look at how I can community organize for the queer tech community and just create more inclusion and diversity in tech in general, because I think it really needs it. But I can't really speak for any perspectives other than being white ethnically, but LGBT and queer issues and trans issues I can definitely represent. So it's just a matter of figuring that out. It's been a long ride.
Yeah, and just so for the listeners' clarification, you two do work together to organize.
We work
poly
together
events.
to organize Poly Cocktail San Diego and a bi-monthly poly discussion group.
Yep. It's like every possible way to break away from mainstream monogamy is happening in this room right now.
Yes, I am subversion.
Yeah. So, and just I guess like a quick background for me and like why gender has always been very interesting to me. I lived some of my earlier years in life in Iran. I was born here, but I lived in Iran when I was very young, and so when I moved here, it was pretty common for like the other kids at school to call me fag. Like, this guy's gay, he's a fag. It was like the most common thing that I would receive, and it would be like due to a lot of very superficial things that mainstream society would decide like these are gay things. Like one of them being how I cross my legs when I sit down. It's knee over knee, right? And it's and in Middle Eastern culture, you do that so you don't show the sole of your shoe to somebody, and that's an insult. So I just kind of grew up being used to that without even thinking twice about it. But then over here, I do that, and they're like, "Well, this guy's gay." Also, I really like Madonna.
Is that an Iranian thing? Or?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think when you get into like a lot of Middle Eastern cultures, like, I mean, at that time when I grew up, it was like Michael Jackson, Madonna, but I also just really like Eurodance, Snap, Rhythm as an Answer, listen to that on repeat. Like, so it's a lot of that kind of stuff. So you would have, so I even like actually like I remember in high school I would have my my Walkman, and on one side of the cassette I'd have like Madonna and Eurodance and other kind of dance music, right? And on the other side I have some hardcore gangster rap music. Because it happened multiple times where somebody would come and snatch my headphones off of my head and put it on their own ears and go, "Listen, dude, you fucking fag," and throw it back at me. So after a couple of times of that, I actually kept a bunch of cassettes around where on one side it would be the hardcore gangster rap. So as soon as they'd grab it, I'd hit the switch real quick and they'd hear some gangster rap and go, "Oh, okay, all right, wow. You're not gay." So the subject's been very interesting to me.
Yeah.
And I think like one of the most beautiful experiences that I've had from exploring the burn community has been the exploration of making peace with masculinity and sort of where I'm at with my masculinity or femininity, and seeing how they can be energies that can be wielded as opposed to something that you are a slave to. And that's been the experience that I've had. So if at any point, so personally, but as far as questions go, I am going to ask you guys like super pretend I'm a 5-year-old and this is not my background at all.
Yeah, sure.
And you are talking to somebody who's never had any experience whatsoever. So we can kind of get into some of the meat of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Can we do like a quick glossary of gender roles?
Gender
Of terms,
roles?
you mean?
Terms?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Terms. Where would we start?
I mean, I think there's the binary assumption.
Yeah.
We can start with that, right? So gender is boy and girl, and we normally think of it as just that.
Mm-hmm.
And then those of us who are genderqueer or gender nonconforming say, fuck that. I don't fit either of these roles. I personally don't fit either of these roles. Neither one of these feels right to me. And I am something outside of that binary, which can mean different things to different people.
Yeah.
But
would you be able to articulate with words what that feeling is, or is it something that just kind of sits inside of you?
I mean, I grew up in Orthodox Jewish community. I went to yeshiva. I had to wear a skirt every single day. And everything was segregated. You know, you pray separately and you pray every day. And when you pray, the boys say in the morning, "Thank you for not making me a woman." And the girls say, "Thank you for making me as you saw fit." So, gender roles, very, very strict gender roles, were what I grew into.
Yeah.
And that felt really uncomfortable. And I tried to be a girl. In my 20s, I wore makeup, I wore pastel, don't ask for pictures, I don't show them. Didn't look good. Didn't feel good. Yeah. And then I went through trying to be more butch, trying to be more mask. And that didn't feel good either. And it was actually my first burn that kind of helped me work beyond that and say, you know what? I like sparkly nail polish, and I'm going to put on sparkly nail polish, and that doesn't make me a girl, and doesn't put all of the other assumptions about girls on me. I can just like sparkly nail polish. Fuck you.
Yeah. What year was that?
That was last year. That was 2015.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So this, I mean, is very much we think we've made it so far in our journeys, and then we discover this whole new chapter.
Yeah.
All of a sudden. Did your exploration of sexual orientation affect your questions about gender?
Personally, yes and no. No, so I knew I was bisexual. It's not the term I use queer now, but the term I thought of bisexual when I was 11. And I never questioned that. It made perfect sense to me. Very briefly, there was a time period when I was 11, I liked girls before I liked boys. And so I definitely had some masculine tendencies, and I liked girls, and I had a thought. It was actually The Princess Bride made me think this, because I didn't want to be Princess Buttercup.
Okay.
I wanted to be the pirate. I wanted to be the one scaling the cliff and having the sword fight. And so I thought, do I want to be am I a transsexual? Transsexual was the term that I knew then. It was a really abstract thought. Sure. I didn't really know fully what that meant, but I kind of knew.
The idea was that you felt...
I felt male identified to some degree, and I liked girls, so clearly that must mean that I'm a man.
Right.
And then I liked boys, and then I was kind of like, oh, okay, so... whatever, I'll just forget all my thoughts about gender and try to be a girl for another 20 years before everything explodes.
Yeah. Right. I during that same period I was describing earlier, I had multiple occasions where I looked at gay porn to try to see if it does anything for me. and I'm like, well, it doesn't disgust me because everybody else looks at it and goes, ew. I'm like, no, there's nothing for me to not feeling any tingles anywhere.
Right.
So I imagine that's something that is probably a common enough confusion for a lot of young people growing up, where they're looking at their own sexual orientation and that they're mixing that up with what gender identity could be for them.
Yeah.
I was absolutely going to say the same thing. You were talking earlier. You were saying that you think about gender, and then you were mentioning parts in your life where you had sexuality conflicts with people. And I was just going to put that pin in that gender and sexuality are definitely, they interrelate and they can affect each other, absolutely, but they're also completely different concepts. And I think that maybe if we're talking 101, that's I think a lot of people get confused, is they think of, there's gay, there's straight, there's bi, there's transgender, there's no, these are different things. You can be a trans man who likes men, a trans man who likes women. If you're using those sexuality labels, and you can be a person who goes from straight to gay. Right. And that's kind of, I always consider myself sort of hetero-flexible, in that maybe one out of every, 100 boys, I'd be like, you're kind of cute. Not in a way I'd like to do anything with, but have always really completely liked women. And since coming to identify more on the feminine spectrum myself, I've been exploring frick, this is being there's kind of a gay, there's a lesbian identity here I can think about. And when I started looking at my attraction to women through that lens, it started making way more sense to me personally. The way I experience attraction to women is very much I want us to be completely egalitarian in a way that having a masculine identity and having a masculine body and having all the masculine gender roles put on you can never really allow. And so, yeah, experiencing my sexuality through my gender lens has been a thing. And then also, kind of becoming queer yourself often makes your sexuality more queer. Like, I am more interested in people and more attracted to people who also are not straightforward in those gender or sexuality ways. If you want to think of, a puzzle piece meeting a puzzle piece, well, suddenly your puzzle piece gets a lot more, like, bumpy and curly and a lot more shapes in it. And so you kind of look for people who have those similar shapes to mesh with.
I wish I had a notepad, because you just went through like 75 different things I want to hit. But I think perhaps, and by any means, correct me if I'm wrong, perhaps the confusion in a lot of society about the mixture of sexual orientation and gender roles comes from the sort of the umbrella of the LGBTQ community. And the example sort of that I would give, again, from my observation from the outside, would be, I describe the burner community to people this way. People outside the burn community. I'm like, look, it's 50 different subcultures. There's a lot of different communities under this kind of burn umbrella. Burning Man, the burner community, did not by any means invent this movement. It just gave... It's like our comic convention. It's like the place where, you could bring it under the same umbrella, but you have so many different communities that are dramatically different from each other. You have sort of like the consensual non-monogamy community. You have musicians. You have artists. You have healers. You have so many different communities, but it seems like there's kind of a general agreement that everybody came to. Is like, hey, let's join forces and kind of not fuck with each other, right? And promote each other to do better and build community. And I wonder if that's very similar to sort of like the LGBT community, where there were so many LGBT folks sort of like scattered around the world, so many disenfranchised from their hometowns and home communities, kicked out of their families, right? And coming into find a place where they can be under the same umbrella and sort of like support each other is sort of like what I'm looking at from the outside.
Can I ask
Please, yeah, please.
So I don't disagree with what you're saying, but the confusion predates that.
Okay.
In the late 1800s, sexology became a thing. So this is where, like, Kara, the gender studies person, comes in.
Please.
Sexology became a thing, and basically sexologists kind of decided that there's such a thing as gay and straight. Right? Before it was, these are acts that we do, not who we are, but that there is such a thing as the homosexual and the heterosexual. And they categorized homosexual men as being effeminate and homosexual women as being masculine, mannish women. They were actually called sexual inverts. The notion that, like, you're an inverted, you're not a woman, you're actually inverted like into a man. And to the point where they actually believed, to some degree, that lesbian sex was sex between a femme woman who is actually straight and is deluded somehow by this, nightmare deviant invert woman, and the deviant invert woman whose clitoris is enlarged and can penetrate her like a penis. This is what they thought lesbian sex was.
Wow. So who is this they? The
sexologists of the 1880s. They wrote about this, and these were scientists. Okay. These were psychologists.
Sure.
And that's what they thought. That's all the possibility that there was. That is all there was.
Right.
And that went into the mainstream.
Yeah.
So we have our notions of the feminine man and the masculine woman as being the gay man and the lesbian.
Right.
And then we kind of assume that is all you get to gender. And so then, that then tumbles into our, like, misunderstanding of transness as, like, a femme man or a masculine woman, which is not it.
Sure. Or all the other misunderstandings.
Or all the other misunderstandings.
I think in general, psychologists have done more harm than good to the gender and sexuality non-conforming. Like, I think they're only non-conforming because of those psychologists, right?
Right.
Establishing that deviance. I've been in, like the LGBTQIA. I've been saying
So many letters.
Yeah, I've been saying for a while that it really seems more like a convenient designation for the normative. I'm using air quotes here than a genuine coalition. Like, yes. People who are oppressed in similar ways do tend to band together and develop culture and may develop some identities there, but I think I don't know if this is true, but I think that some of the perception some people might have is that there are like straight normative folks, and then all the gays, queers, lesbians, trans people are all just hanging out together in one big party.
Right.
And that is definitely not true. And in fact, you have people in that movement. If you get people, the individual letters in that. Oftentimes are in conflict with each other. Yep. Like you have the cisgender homosexuals who have been playing up their normativity to get greater acceptance in the public eye, and we have same-sex marriage now, which is great. But by having that, you're also kind of throwing other people under the bus who maybe aren't really that big into those types of partnerships in the first place, or people who don't identify along those gender lines and for whom same-sex marriage is kind of a non-concept.
Cisgender would be...
Yeah, I wanted to get to that.
Sure.
And that really ties into what we're talking about in terms of there's the normative and then there's the other. And so cisgender, cis and trans are both terms that derive from Latin. They come from... They were used in chemistry before gender, but they apply in other ways. You might say, I'm taking a transatlantic flight. But trans simply means on the other side, and cis means on the same side. Huh. So anyone who does not, it's not quite as clear-cut as anyone who doesn't identify as trans is cis. But if you agree that the gender you were assigned at birth is the gender that you identify with, and there doesn't seem to be any incongruence, you could say the gender congruence for you is being cisgender, and kind of gender incongruity, you do not agree with the gender that was assigned to you at birth, could very well mean that you are trans. And by gender assigned at birth, we use that instead of born as or, biologically or sex is, because for a lot of people that falls apart. You have intersex people who you look at genitalia and that does not tell the story that people think genitalia should tell. And there are trans people who do not ever feel like they were born as a man and then became a woman. They were born being who they are, and they've only been trying to get society to accept who they are. And there are people who feel like they were born as one thing and led to another. But we use gender assigned at birth to reflect that it is not a consensual process that the individual determines. It is something that the biomedical establishment does for you by looking between your legs or at an ultrasound and then putting that in a birth certificate, and that's how people treat you for the rest of your life.
Right.
And so using cis and trans is not just a way to stick it to the normative. It's a way of really accurately reflecting that being straight feels like something, being gay feels like something, being trans feels like something, and being cis feels like something. Yeah. And the fact that being cis or feeling cis is a feeling of congruence is, I think, maybe the major block to understanding the trans and gender nonconforming experience, because I don't know, one of the metaphors I've been using is like, imagine you're laying in a bathtub of perfectly body temperature water, like you're in a some sort of sensory deprivation tank. Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel like anything, even though that water is a temperature. Right. That temperature matches perfectly your own internal temperature. So what does it feel like? It feels like air, really. But someone for whom that water is too hot or too cold, they're really going to feel that. And so even though every person in this scenario, whether it's too hot, too cold, or just right, has a water temperature, some people are going to feel that water temperature is outside of their bounds of comfort, which is showing them that water temperature even exists. And some people just aren't going to feel that at all. So they think people are making it up or faking, or they just can't put themselves into that headspace.
So I mean, I guess we don't have you might have exact numbers, I don't know.
Yeah.
But how common is the experience that an individual could have, anybody could look at them from the outside and think this is a cisgender individual, but on the inside they feel that temperature doesn't quite match?
You're talking about a dark figure, like undiagnosed transness.
But I think anyone who is trans has experienced that.
Right. Like I experience that currently. Like I'm not going out using a female voice. I'm still in an early stage of transition hormonally. So to the world, I'm either just a straightforward cis dude, or like a slightly femmy dude, or maybe a gay guy. Very few people can look at me and think, oh, okay, this person is clearly gender nonconforming, which is why I have to wear makeup or wear a dress, or like really push on that if I want to convey that to the world. But then that also takes energy to perform gender in that way, and then also to sort of put up your own internal armor, because you know people are probably going to be looking at you and judging you.
Yeah.
I think that more people are coming out to themselves as gender nonconforming all the time because of this discourse, because of the reason we're sitting here. You know, you want to talk about it in a sphere that is not strictly gender related. So I think more people are coming to realize that maybe they're non-binary, maybe they are trans, or at the very least, maybe they're not cis or straight. Like, queer is kind of a great catch-all term, because it really just means it's kind of an umbrella for all the stuff you don't want to define. But at some point, it can become an identity too. To me, queer means breaking down all of those societal structures, breaking the pieces with a hammer, and then rummaging among the pieces and figuring out which ones you want to pick back up and put back together. Even if you're putting back together a completely normative self, like anyone who has really thought about who they are and really interrogated themselves for sexuality, gender, identity, and came to the conclusion that they're okay with what they thought they were before, you're still performing the same process that queer people are. You just came to the same conclusion that you started with, and some people come to different conclusions. But I think everyone should go through that process of breaking down the templates and then putting back what feels right to you.
Right.
Which is what, I mean, bringing it back to like burner culture, that is what burner culture allows for, is that sense of exploration.
Right.
And taking away those societal expectations for a little bit, and actually dipping your finger and dipping your toe and saying what feels good, what feels right. Even if cis does feel like perfectly fine, and that temperature was always kind of in the background, what other possibilities exist?
Yeah. The word queer, I feel like, has like gained a lot more traction more recently.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, it's not that recent on the East Coast. Lagging behind a little bit out here for some reason. So the notion of, rather than gay or lesbian, kind of those very specific, or bisexual, for there to be kind of an umbrella use of the term queer, which is kind of culturally different in a very nuanced way. Yeah. That has been around in New York. That's been around on the East Coast. But it seems to not have gotten here somehow.
So what is the advantage to the title rather than gay or straight or?
I think there is a realm of possibility in queerness. Yeah. So gay it's a very rigid category. We kind of know there's a culture to it, and we kind of know what that culture is. Lesbian there's a culture to it, and that's great, that's cool. And some people can be, lesbian and be within lesbian culture and also identify as queer. But queer is always in flux, and it's always challenging and questioning.
Right.
And that's the element of it that is so appealing. Because I don't have to explain myself. I don't have to say I'm bisexual. Or pansexual. I'm just queer. I'm different. I'm deviant. I like the word deviant. Yeah. Honestly, like I am deviant.
Yeah.
I veered. I veered from the norm, and it feels good to be able to say yes. Because when I was 12, you talked about your cassette tape. Well, I listened to Nirvana and Pearl Jam in hiding.
Yeah.
And then I studied Mariah Carey and Boyz II Men, because that's what the friends that I had were listening to, right? And I didn't have the courage, I didn't have the support system and the network and the internet to say, I like Nirvana. And it's such a small little thing, but it was something I had to hide, because conformity and acceptance are so important in teenage years.
And do you want to give context on where you grew up?
I grew up in New York, in Brooklyn, in an Orthodox Jewish community. So the religious and the cultural norms and the gender roles were extra strict. And there wasn't an option. Like, the school I went to didn't have like I don't know, like there wasn't like a goth kid group. There was just like the cool kids doing the norm thing and the not cool kids doing the norm thing.
Yeah.
So being able to actually explore and have fun and challenge and rebel is something I didn't experience till my adulthood.
Yeah. Pansexual versus bisexual.
Well. So, technically, the bi and bisexual means that you're attracted to a gender that is your gender and a gender that's not your gender. Since my gender is different by the day, I don't think that's the best term. And traditionally, when you say bi, you think male and female.
Right.
So it reinforces this binary. So even if I am attracted to many genders, including my own, it's a reinforcement of the notion that there are two types of people. Whereas queer and pan don't do that. Pan means, all the gender. So that's why it works. That's why it feels better for me.
Yeah.
And I'll use bisexual. I'll deploy it in a situation where that's the term that people know, and I don't want to start like explaining.
Yeah.
But it doesn't sit well with me.
I'll take a note and say, too, that if you identify as bisexual, that is fine. Like, I don't think bisexuals are ruining people's concepts of gender, like, or reinforcing binarist stereotypes. If you feel like your sexuality falls along a pretty straightforward binary trajectory, and pansexual doesn't feel like it fits you, then
sure.
Bi is
I'm not a binary person.
Right.
My partners aren't binary people. So it's just not an accurate, useful term. It feels like a lie when I say it.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
and using it the way that you described, my gender and other genders, that even doesn't necessarily imply binary. Though I agree that this is a more modern, recent reinterpretation, redefinition of the word, just because people have to acknowledge that gender is not so straightforward. But some people really do still define it in the men and women. And again, like, you pick the term that you hit upon a nice topic, because that is something that is under active and constant discussion in the queer, pan, bi communities. Well, what even am I? Like, we tend to define our sexuality in relation to our gender in this like gay, straight sort of way. So when your gender is a big question mark, your sexuality kind of becomes a big question mark too. Right. And I think ultimately people just wind up settling on what feels most right for them. I use pansexual because also because of the original binary connotations of bisexual, but even after in the new, more modern way. I feel like my attraction is really geared very heavily, solidly towards femininity. Not women, females, girls, but like femininity. I don't really like using gendered energy, even though I use that term all the time because it feels useful in conversation. But you could say I'm attracted to feminine energy, not masculine energy, but sometimes people who identify as masculine or along masculine continuums have significant feminine energy, which means I'm probably going to find them attractive. And I think some pansexuals will, people who identify as pansexual will also have this like internal conflict of, well, I'm not attracted to everyone equally. Like, I haven't visited all the gym leaders of the like trans man, trans woman, cis man, and gotten all my stamps. But it's fine. Like, you don't have to be equally attracted to everyone the same way. Bisexuality does not mean that you are 50-50 attracted to men and women. So yeah, it's all you need to do is learn the terms and kind of see what communities out there are around each definition, and you'll probably just find whatever fits you.
I wonder how much of even the ability to have this discussion, this exact part of the discussion that we're having right now about pansexual versus bisexual, how much of that is connected to, for lack of a better description, the privilege that we have to be living where we're living. We're in Southern California. As conservative as San Diego is compared to a lot of other places, it's still pretty fucking far to the left. You go somewhere else, like in the Midwest or the South, like, I feel like just a couple of decades ago, the discussion that I would have with my LGBT friends was more about, the argument was more like, I'm born this way. This is who I am. I am attracted to this. I can't control it. Whereas now, it seems to be the discussion is, you know what? What does it matter? Like, sure, I was born this way, I was attracted to this, but you know what? I'm going to be attracted to whoever the fuck I want. and it feels like queer is almost like leaning towards a more ideal place that we would be as human society, which is you can do whatever the fuck you want. You can be attracted to whoever the fuck you want to be attracted to. Like, there shouldn't be barriers based on, well, I was born this way, I can't help it, kind of thing. And please,
That's really, that's really complicated. And
sure.
I think,
I can say,
I think that there's like
a side note real quick. Every time you guys say like 3 sentences, that right there is like 10 shows right there. So we're totally barely
We're only going to get through when we get through.
Right.
Yeah.
Barely scraping the surface.
Right. Well, that's really complicated. I mean, there's first off, there's generations. Time has passed, and the internet is a thing. So yes, like there's a liberal environment here, but if you're living in Wichita and you have a computer, you have Tumblr, and you feel like you want to seek that out because you are different, you can find that. You can find the terms. You can find the community online. Which is not like to say, oh, everything is wonderful. But I think if you, from an insider perspective, I think the internet has done like the most work.
Absolutely.
From an outsider perspective, I do agree that the fact that there's just kind of critical mass of us out there,
Right.
it's then bringing it into your world. So that was the one thing I was going to say. As far as like the Born This Way narrative, I mean, that was like the only thing you were allowed to say once upon a time.
Right.
And now people are saying, fuck that, that's not how I feel. And some people say that exactly is how I feel. And like, that's great. There's a multiplicity of experiences out there. Yeah. We're human beings. Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
To poke that even further, like, what does it mean to perform an action authentically? If you do something authentically, that means you're doing what you feel. And how we feel, like, we could say it's from experiences A, B, and C, or genes D, F, and Y, but either way, it's who we are at that moment. So you could say we were born that way in the sense that the person we are at the moment we make that decision is the person who's authentically making that decision. So I don't think that saying it's not necessarily being born that way is also saying it's a total conscious choice all the time.
Yeah.
You still do whatever you feel like you do. Queer's a really interesting term. I think it's a place that a lot of people stop at, or stop at briefly on the way to other identities, because the identity of a lot of people inside it is often, stop asking questions. Like, it's an identity that doesn't require you to define yourself with other labels. You get to put queer on and say, okay, I'm not straight, I'm not gay, I'm not trans, I don't know. But then when you realize you like living in that place of liminality, in that place of, the term I've been using is, it starts off as a shield, and then for some people it becomes a coat of arms.
Right.
Like, well, no, who I am is a person who does not need these labels and does not want these labels. But I think it's a really great, the fact that it can be seen as a bit of an umbrella is great for a lot of people. And in reference to what you were saying earlier, I think that it has had an impact on society and culture in the sense that, well, it'd be hard to associate the word privilege with any aspect of the queer experience, really. But certainly we are in a state of, we are privileged to be having a more advanced discussion than some people have had the ability to have in the past.
Right.
And I personally think that if we're bringing it back to like transness and queerness, I think some people who may have before identified as like butch lesbians or really like high femme gay guys may have wound up, in today's world, those same people would come forth and find within themselves, oh, I'm a trans man or I'm a trans woman. And so having even the concept that we can stop at a place without labels, or that those labels, or that there's more than just the binary and there's more than just straightforward sexuality, has enabled a broader range of sexuality and a more diversity of identity, which is why it seems to a lot of people, everyone is trans these days, everyone's some sort of gender non-conforming, I'm going to make my gender a race car driver or a taxi helicopter. You hear that a lot. But it's really that we're just developing language, and that's what the internet has been great at, is allowing people. When people say Tumblr, they're really talking about spaces where these conversations are happening in depth, and where people are actively coining terms and developing language to describe themselves. If we're going to bring it back to the water temperature analogy, it would be very coarse just to say my water is the right temperature or the wrong temperature. Maybe it's a little hot, maybe it's a little cold, maybe it's lukewarm. Maybe it's scalding. Maybe it's room temperature instead of body temperature. We're developing the language to put the nuance into that. And a lot of people who haven't had words to describe themselves now suddenly do. And so they're feeling affinity and they're gravitating towards those labels. So it seems like these people are just coming out of the woodwork. But honestly, I think, sexuality and gender are both kind of a normal distribution. And I think most people are at least a little bit non-conforming in a lot of ways. I think this idea we have of the doodly dude and the chickly chick, the perfectly gender-conforming people with a perfectly straightforward sexualities, perfectly being heavy air quotes, I think those are the minority. And it sucks because they're the stereotypes that were given by the media that have the biggest effect on us. But I think their actual representation in humankind, whether or not those people themselves realize it, is pretty small compared to how many people are like, being a guy's okay, I guess.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
And just, I do want to get back to gender because that was kind of our topic.
Sure.
But just to add one more thing as far as that with sexuality and as far as that nuance goes, I know so many people who are straight but have had a same-sex experience, who are lesbian identified but have been with men and enjoyed, who are gay men but have been with women and enjoyed.
Right.
And in the cultures where you identify as lesbian or you identify as straight or you identify as gay, and in previous generations where queer didn't exist, you couldn't add that into your repertoire without kind of losing face and losing your space.
Right.
Whereas queer is, well, okay, maybe I'm mostly attracted to, femme energy, but then there's, some, kind of masculine things happening. Who knows? And I'm okay with it. Maybe there's like 90% and 10%, and that's cool. And within queer community, who you're with doesn't define you. And what you might try doesn't shift who you are, because we've all kind of agreed that everything's on the table.
Right.
As far as queer identity goes, it's all a possibility. It's all accepted.
Right.
If that makes sense.
I don't want it to sound like we're both here being just queer cheerleaders, even though one of the slogans in the queer community is queer all the things. But I think that, similar
You guys
to how...
have your own slogan?
Similar to how that definition or that identity arising or emerging has allowed people to get away from their identity being something that they necessarily perform, I think, maybe the number of people who identify as queer might shrink at some point after reaching an apex, because the fact that we've entered that place outside of places and allowed ourselves to have those conversations may bring up a bunch of other identities that people fall into that feel right for them. I think of queerdom as kind of being a big train station. Maybe there's a lot of cool stuff and you want to hang out there and see what's going on. It's a place that exists, but it also is in some ways a place to lead to other places. That's a poor analogy because I don't want to live at a train station.
Yeah.
I was trying to
Are you
communicate.
a street urchin?
I suddenly imagine all these Republican congressmen have been caught at train stations.
Maybe queerness is like the burn.
Yeah.
Is that there is an ephemeral quality to it. There is an ever-changing quality to it, and it can allow for a multiplicity of experiences.
Well, ain't that adorable? You brought it back. Good job.
I like that.
I'm a teacher. It's what I do.
In radio, we call that a bring around.
Okay.
Not a reach around.
I was gonna say. Oh, you know us too well.
But later.
Can you speak about your transition, your process?
Yeah. It's funny because sitting here, I was thinking about, as Kara was giving their sort of arc there, I realized I can actually thank festival culture for giving me that realization. It kind of slapped me across the face a couple of years ago. I called it the gender trout. It's like being hit with a big fish. And I wasn't 100% sure where it came from. It's just I woke up one day and had the thought and realized, oh, crap. Suddenly a lot of stuff makes sense. But I think what it came from is I had started to engage with festival culture, going out to Utopia, Lucidity. Started, like many people do, at Lightning in a Bottle, and just started trending more towards the participatory rather than the consumerist.
Lightning in the Bottle is the gateway drug.
I really... Yeah, we can talk about that later. I think it does... I don't know about these days, but I think in some ways it does more good than harm. But I started to dress up as a cat, by which I mean putting on a vest and a tie and a cat mask and just going out and, it's just like a character. A lot of people in these cultures create characters for themselves. And I realized I really liked that character. I really liked being that thing. For a lot of reasons. It's fun to be a cat. It's fun to just sort of slink in and out of conversations. But I realized a lot of what I liked about it was that it kind of let me have this genderless, playful energy. When I thought of myself, even though I'm wearing formal male attire, I feel more like a non-gendered being in that state. And so I started asking myself, well, okay. I think once the concept that you could even switch your gendered energy became a thing, that was the missing piece. And as soon as I put that in there, I think the follow-up question was, oh, well, if there's a slider here, where do I want it?
Yeah.
And then it was, I've been spending my entire life as a kind of femme boy, and maybe I'd rather be a kind of masculine girl. And I think that kind of gender identity and that kind of transition experience or transition need is not really talked about in media. A lot of people talk about it as being like really binary and wanting to go from one pole to another. But I think the reason a lot of people, I was 28 at the time, I think the reason it takes some people so long is that the change is not major, but it is major in that it is a transition. Like whether or not you want to go a couple feet or several miles, you still need to go through the process of obtaining hormones, if that is what you want. Right. Some people don't want that, and they're content to just queer up their presentation and to start wearing makeup or start, whatever it feels like to them. And some people, like non-binary folks, testosterone wouldn't do anything for them because they don't want deeper voices or chest hair, or they don't want boobs or whatever. Like those people need nanotech, not hormones. We're not there yet. Getting back to me, so once I realized that there was a thing that needed to be done, I started doing all that research. Reddit, actually, I don't really go on there much anymore, and I don't think it has a very helpful community at all in aggregate.
It's the internet's front page.
But the trans community is actually pretty good for a lot of people who are questioning these. All those questions was, am I trans? Am I trans? People ask that like 10 times a day in those forums. Those are there, archived, and you can read through them. Yeah. So I made a bunch of posts, and I read a bunch of posts, and I just started thinking, going to therapy. And
what is a common answer for that? Am I trans? How do you answer that?
A variety of ways. There's actually, here, can you use your computer right now?
I have no internet.
Oh, okay.
Right now.
So there's a website called amitrans.com.
Okay.
And when you click on it, it's just a big word that says yes. Put up by Zinnia Jones, who's the trans author. But this idea is that if you're even asking that question,
right,
says, have you ever really wondered if you were a guy or not, Arash? And it's okay to say yes or whatever. Yeah?
I really have. Sorry, I'm plugging.
Sure.
When you pointed at the computer, I realized the power was going. I definitely, because I spent a lot of time exploring relationships that I was having with women, my own identity when it comes to masculinity. I remember looking at experiences that I was having with my ex, who I was with for 6 years. Yeah. And so what happened, the long and short of it is after I came out of that relationship is when I started to explore the polyamory community.
Right.
And I've yet to be in like an actual functioning polyamorous relationship with multiple people, but simply the intellectual and emotional and spiritual experience of exploring polyamory has been huge for me. It's really opened a lot of doors for me intellectually and spiritually. So one of those things that I started to observe was that when I've worked past jealousy. I don't feel like ownership over people. I'm very happy to have relationships with people I'm seeing or having sex with about other people that they're seeing or having sex with. But then when I looked at my ex, I felt like I still feel this like raging, trigger-filled jealousy about her and her experiences than other men. And when I look at that feeling, it felt more like a competitive jealousy. Than oh no, another man is fucking you kind of thing. Like, no, you got to do something that I didn't go. You were more attractive to somebody else than I was. And I wonder how often that happens I don't know, but I can only speak for myself. And that started to make me really think about like, well, where is my gender identity lie? Because I am kind of seeing her as like, like another girl I'm being catty towards rather than, the person who was my partner and I was supposed to be the dominant man, you know? So that's where those questions
are. So you interrogated that and you came to, okay, I am a guy, I presume.
Yeah, I haven't figured out that part quite yet.
Keep questioning.
I'm not going to go down the woo-woo rabbit hole here,
sure.
But I did have an interesting energy healing session, which lasted like an hour and a half. And I promise you, listeners, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole in this episode. But the healer, a friend of mine who was conducting this ceremony, afterwards described to me, without me having told him any of this, that he found that there was a feminine, almost like a energy trapped inside of me, and he released her. And it felt like it was like something from ancient.
Was she screaming?
She was, and he said there was like, he was trying to describe it. He's like, it's hard to describe with words, but there was like these men pawing and grabbing at her, and it's something from like, ancient empire days where women started to get subjugated. So he kind of released her, and I felt this release, and who knows what the fucking that is. I'm not even getting into that right now, but that was an interesting experience that I had in regards to this.
That is interesting. People experience gender through a variety of lenses.
Right. So I'm not going to try to like say what that is, but what it was best describes sort of this feeling that I've always had, which is that there is this feminine energy inside of me that I've made peace with in more recent times, and that what that has done is it's helped me make peace with my masculinity, and I feel really great about it now.
That's really fantastic.
Yeah.
Getting to the amitrans.com thing, it was tongue-in-cheek in that the actual answer is only you can decide for yourself. But it's kind of a lighthearted jab at the fact that so many people question, and when you look at it from the perspective, like I look at my questions from the perspective of having had those questions in the first place, and the answer to me feels like a pretty straightforward, like, yeah, of course. I'd had a lot of incidents in my life, like in my childhood, just anomalies, like not really being that cool with touching my junk when I was a kid until I went through puberty. Periods where I was cross-dressing sexually and just like started for no reason, stopped for no reason. All these things that were just sort of one-offs, when I held it up against this idea of, oh, what if this unifying theory is I just was not comfortable with my gender and I was trying to find other ways to experience or explore it, all those pieces just snap together, like pulling a magnet out and all these iron filings just jump out of the context of your life and jump right in there. So that at least locked in for me that I needed to do that exploration. So condensing a year and a half into just a few sentences, started going through therapy, wanted to start taking hormones right away, but I had pretty good therapists who were like, no, like try push first as far as you can without going the hormone route. And so I started.
Therapist is a clinical psychologist, or
yeah.
Okay.
I had been seeing one for a while. It was actually a burner. And if you're out there and you know who you are, thanks. And then
also, I'd like to have you on the show.
And then I went to another person who specialized in gender, and they were able to take me that rest of the way.
Also a clinical psychologist.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Actually, both MFTs, but with
marriage family therapist.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But also a psychologist.
Right.
Yeah. So pushed in that direction. Started wearing more, nail polish and makeup, and just trying to get into the idea of, okay, I'm pushing it in this direction. Do I want to go further? And the question I just kept asking myself is, how do I feel today? Does this feel good? Do I want to go forward? Do I want to go, not even forward or back? Do I want more of this? Do I want less of this? And just inched my way to the point where, okay, I'm a queer guy now. Like I'm wearing makeup. I have nail polish on. I'm pretty cool wearing femme clothing. I'm not allergic to collared shirts anymore, because the first thing when I started having gender feels was only living in androgynous clothing and just being like, what am I? Everything feels like a lie. Then I got to that point where I was like, oh, okay, I still want hormones. I still want to have that experience of a feminine form. And so I was really lucky that I was able to move within the medical system in a way that allowed me to obtain hormones and started taking them. And I'd been kind of fucking around with them for a while. I got them off the gray market and had just been taking them kind of half-heartedly to experiment. And after I went away to Europe for a couple months and didn't have access to them, I realized during then that I really liked having them in a way that I couldn't articulate. As soon as I came back, I started taking them very regularly. And that's when I started to get changes, like nipple sensitivity changing, breast buds starting to form, skin starting to soften, all the things that happen to you when you start taking estrogen and testosterone blockers.
Tell me about the nipple sensitivity.
Of course.
And I'm going to explain to you why in just a second.
Yeah, okay. I can't represent experiences across all people, because some people who are estrogen dominant have completely insensitive nipples, and people who are testosterone dominant have crazy sensitive nipples.
Yeah.
But I would say the experience was just sort of a whole new world of sensation opening up in that area that I hadn't really been privy to before.
Yeah. My nipples are pretty sensitive.
Your girl.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah. No, if I
break it to you on the show.
If that was something my ex kind of knew when she just like wanted us, like, well, not necessarily want us to be done, but she just like kind of was ready for me to finish. Start sucking on my nipple. done immediately.
It's a different. I think even in that context, I like having my nipples played with before, but it's just different.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know, just biologically the.
Because I imagine there's some guy listening right now going, "Wait a minute, my nipples are sensitive."
Yeah.
It's like, am I transgender? Yeah.
It's different. It's different. And this was an experience in response to attaining estrogen, so it's not like you could be sitting around and just. Some people do have situations where they are not straightforward testosterone or estrogen dominant, and everyone has a mix of both in their system. But I also don't want to link this to the idea that if you have a bunch of estrogen in your body, you're going to be trans, and testosterone, you're going to be, a dude or whatever.
Right.
I think that if I gave a person who was really congruent with their gender identity the opposing gender hormone, and they started experiencing those changes, they would probably feel dysphoria in the same way that trans people feel dysphoria for being on the hormone that was their body started producing when they went through puberty. So yeah, just through experiencing those changes, realizing, okay, yes, this is definitely me. I really love this. I feel like myself in a way that I've never felt before. I feel like I can kind of own my body now, whereas before I was just sort of leasing. I was renting space in that building, and now it feels like my home. I'm starting to put up pictures and paint the walls and really take pride in who I am, which looks like a lot of things: self-care, motivation, doing things for myself, pushing myself forward in career-related aspects that before I just didn't feel like doing, because that wasn't me. That was someone else whose body I was just sort of living in. And you don't really realize that until you experience an It's like being born with a migraine, and you live for 30 years, and you don't know it's not normal to have migraines, and someone finally gives you Advil, and you're like, oh, that's really been holding me back.
And I can actually speak to that.
Please.
Literally, not migraine, but I have a wheat allergy, and I didn't know it my whole life. And 3 months after going gluten-free, I discovered that I had stomach aches my entire life. I didn't know it. I thought that was normal. I thought general physical discomfort constantly was the human experience.
Yeah.
And then being free, so on the non-trans, non-gender level, being freed from that, just shifted my entire perspective of how I'd been living my life.
Yeah.
Until then.
Another non-trans thing, I started taking ADHD meds for the first time in my life, Wellbutrin, and it wasn't until taking them I realized I have had chronic fatigue my entire life. I never wanted to work because I always just needed to sleep. I was always just too tired to function. And they gave me mental clarity and energy, and I realized, maybe this is what normal people feel like. And so again, you don't realize what you have until you have it relieved.
Absolutely.
And so even though
you see that, I know I went through it, and I could be projecting on people, but definitely depression, I think, is one of those things.
Sure.
I've had people close to me that I'm watching day-to-day experience. I'm I just feel like they've been depressed for so long that they have no idea they're depressed.
Yeah.
Right.
They're like, this is normal. Yeah, it's normal. World is kind of gray.
Yeah.
I'm no, it can get better.
That's really how I felt, because I'm off E currently for some medical reasons, and I'm experiencing this because I've gone back to this. But for my entire life, you'd say, "How are you?" And I'd say, "Okay, yeah." Even I guess I'm baseline. And I realized that while I was on estrogen, and as I was progressing along that, I would always start answering, "Good."
Yeah.
Really good. And it wasn't anything that I felt. I felt baseline in both cases, but I noticed the fact that my baseline was a lot higher.
Right.
And people think that people who, yes, when you are transitioning and you look in the mirror, there are a lot of thoughts that come up. But I think a lot of people think that trans folks who don't look, completely stealthy or completely passing, terrible word, passing, in the gender that they're transitioning to, are awash in this depression. And yes, for a lot of people, absolutely. But I think the thing that goes understated is that feeling of being yourself is completely separate from how you look. Right. I look in the mirror and I don't see a woman. I see someone who's increasingly becoming more feminine. In fact, I like my masculine features in some ways, and I hope I keep some of them as I transition forward. But it's just good to be yourself. I don't care in a lot of ways that I still look kind of dudely, because it's a process, right?
Yeah.
The only thing you can be faulted for is not starting the process of improvement.
Right.
Once you've started that process of improvement, you owe it to yourself to be okay with yourself at every stage of the way. As long as you're moving in a direction that you consider forward, it's okay. And that applies to so many more things in gender.
Oh, yeah. That's been absolutely the biggest lesson I've learned from all the personal growth that I've had. And there's actually some science behind this as well, but we all human beings, we're in this constant state of motion. we're moving in a direction. Now, whether you've decided to move towards a place where you're aligning with who you are on the inside and you're feeling better every day about the things that you're accomplishing and the way that you're growing, or you're moving towards a fear-based direction. And, life is a roller coaster. Sometimes you go up, sometimes you go down. But I feel like, generally speaking, I see that you can kind of pick a direction. The movement's going to happen whether you like it or not. And there's an interesting... have you guys ever seen slow-mo? Have you heard of slow-mo?
Yeah, the guy in PB who used to be a doctor and decided
Right.
he'd much rather rollerblade.
Have you seen the documentary about him?
I haven't.
There is this... Are you familiar with
No.
slow-mo? Okay, so slow-mo for I'm going to have to describe anyway because listeners not in San Diego. So there's a guy that hangs out in Mission Beach here in San Diego who's called Slow-Mo. And anytime you go to the Mission Beach, Pacific Beach area, you will 90% chance you will see him. He puts on rollerblades, and he starts out in the beginning of the day, and he has his Walkman or whatever, and he's listening to classical music, and it's like the speaker's out, so you can hear the music. It's not just on his ears. And he moves in slow motion on his rollerblades, moving from like just one end of the beach neighborhood to the other end and back, and he does that all day. There's this 15-minute documentary about slow-mo that you can look up online, and he basically breaks down the details about how he what he's actually doing is throughout the day, little by little, very, very small amounts, he's increasing his speed. And so, like, by the end of the day, he's actually moving much faster than he was in the beginning of the day. And he put together this theory about how that experience affects his human body, and how it affects, like, because he's experiencing gravity as he's going around the Earth, and that little bit of increase in the speed keeps increasing the exhilaration that he's feeling. So that feeling that you get from, like, getting on a roller coaster and like dropping to the bottom, like, what he's doing is little by little messing with that throughout the day. So he's playing with that idea that we're always, like, constantly in motion, but little by little we're just going to turn the volume of pleasure up just a little bit. Yeah, but he was like he's like a very wealthy neurologist, I think. Is he a neurologist? I'm not sure. A surgeon, perhaps?
Yeah, someone in the medical profession. Yeah.
Right, yeah. He had a mansion and many cars and stuff. He gave it all up and said, I'm just going to go live by the beach.
I like stories like that.
Yeah. It's really fascinating. I don't remember why I got into that side note, but...
Maybe it's moving forward. I got
momentum.
The only tattoo I have on my wrist is a triangle. It's a mathematical delta. It's a mathematical symbol for change.
Right.
The way I kind of see it is if you have a positive delta, if you're improving your situation, it doesn't matter whether it's by 1% a year or 10% a day, that'd be impossible.
Does it feel like... Tell me if this is correct or incorrect. Yeah. Like, that it feels like there's sort of a place that you're aiming for, that you want to be in. You've sort of, for a lot of your life, were somewhere else, and you're kind of like aligning this.
That's a great question, and it's highly individual, and that's where I will use the term queer privilege. The only time I'll use it, and only kind of tongue in cheek, and that I feel fortunate that I am okay being gender non-conforming. Like, I feel like I am a queer girl. I feel like I am a girl who thought about being a boy and then decided, nah. So even though I'm transitioning by taking estrogen, I'm only on the first leg of this journey. I feel like I'm transitioning to a place where I will be in a body that people readily recognize as female, but I'll still feel kind of non-binary and kind of non-attached to my gender. But I need to get to that point first and then start moving around the other way to a more non-binary space, rather than just stopping in a non-binary space in the body I have now.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't see it as a, like, there is a kind of a person I see myself becoming, for sure. I can't help but project that in the future. But I don't think I have a square destination. I don't know where I'm going to wind up. I just have a compass direction, and the sails are open and they're heading in that direction. Now, some people very much have an image of where they want to be, and they're comparing themselves constantly to that image. And maybe in good ways, maybe in bad ways.
Right.
And I feel for the people who have those experiences, because that's very real and very distressing.
Because the reason I ask is I wonder, it's 2016, so yeah. I do know we're still pretty early, I feel like, in a lot of our studies on the subject. But I wonder, is there any science behind how that is, why that is, that's affecting a more positive internal change? Like, for example, if you're transitioning from a certain gender identity to another one, why is that creating more happiness? Why does that feel better?
It's not conclusive, and I'm not even sure it'd be helpful to try to discuss it. Sure. Only in the sense that when you bring up born as this narratives, it provides a lot of space for people who feel more waffly about it to discard their own experience. For the longest time, you only heard of trans people as being women trapped in men's bodies from a very young age, knew that they were dysphoric and their entire life has been pain. And then there are people who are like, yeah, I want to head in this direction. And those experiences are just as valid as the people who have like extreme life-altering dysphoria. And everyone experiences it too. Like, I look in the mirror, I shouldn't misrepresent my experience. There are times I look in the mirror and I get really bummed out that I still see hair follicles. There are times that I'm really sad at the image that I see, and I have to talk in myself and walk myself through that process. And I know it's not as bad as some other people's, and it's also, better than some other people's, and worse than some other people's, and we're all just in that role. But there's no right way to be trans. There's no right way to experience your gender. And so, yeah, I don't know. There is some neural correlate, probably. There is probably a mixed social and biological component to how we experience and explore our genders. Just from the fact that, like, people want to be feminine, but feminine is a construct. That's where it's tricky, because gender is a joke. Gender is a construct, but it's also very, very real. So it comes down to it's whatever feminine means to you. I want to be feminine, and so I have an idea of what that means, and even though that's a totally socially constructed idea, it's still what I'm moving towards, because that is, to me, what it means. It's my language of expressing femininity, and for someone else, that's going to be totally different. The same way you see two cis women, they're going to present their femininity in completely different ways. Both of them are going to say, yeah, I'm being high femme right now, but it looks like totally different things, because it means different things to different people.
What you just said right now is actually a perfect transition to where I was going to move to next. Because as you're describing looking in the mirror, I wondered if it would be insensitive of me to compare that to the experience that I have looking in the mirror when I was dealing with, like, trying to lose weight and seeing, like, all the, like, my whole life, all kinds of body image issues. Like, that's like a whole topic right there too. But there's times where, like, look in the mirror and I just, like, want to take, like, a knife and cut my midsection out. And the amount of bullying that we deal with if our bodies are not ideal in our upbringing, and that thought made me think of some exchanges that I'd had with you, Kara, like, because you were I'd never really heard that before when you were but you were the first person I heard have this conversation with, where you would clarify, like, okay, when I would say, all right, guys are this way and girls are this way, and you're like, okay, well, those socialized as male versus socialized as female. I guess I want to talk about sensitivity a little bit, because I want to know sort of what is a respectful and honorable way to discuss these topics and to ask these questions for a person who may not be familiar with the environment and the culture.
So I think so often, I see this, I think this happens a lot, is that words can hurt, and that is absolutely true. And at the same time, people don't know that their words are hurtful. And so there's, like, complete naivete and no ill will. And then you get shut down. So you see it kind of in feminist circles, you see it in queer circles, where the content of the question, the allyship, is lost in the scolding, right? And people are afraid they'll get scolded.
So they just don't ask.
I think the internet can be, as we were saying before, and it is a wonderful thing. The internet can be a bad place sometimes to have these conversations, because nuance and eye contact aren't available. And so I can't tell if you just genuinely don't know, or if you're actively trying to prod, or you're refusing to acknowledge my pronouns because you think it's bullshit, or if you just didn't hear or forgot that I use they them pronouns, or you're just so used to saying she that you just forgot.
That's one of the reasons, by the way, this show has never been a phone interview show. We get into some heavy stuff, so eye contact and body language is important.
This room feels real. Good job in this space.
Thank you.
So
the studio.
I think so can I tell a Burning Man story?
Please.
So I had this wonderful
it's about
experience.
time someone.
All right. So I have a lot to say about gender and Burning Man, actually. This past burn, a lot of the camps, there's a bunch of camps that give out stuffed animals.
There's a bunch of them?
There's a bunch of them. I got two from two separate camps, and I know of a third.
I've never run into a stuffed animal camp.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them.
All I find is vodka.
Well, So I was at Poly Paradise, and one morning it was Tuesday morning. I'd just gotten up. I'd come in on Monday, and it's 8 in the morning or so, and I'm butt naked, walk to the Portos, and coming back, I see this pile of dusty stuffed animals as a camp across the street, and they're offering their animals for adoption, and they were like really cute because they had little certificates, little certificate to give a name to your new stuffed animal. And I see this bunny, and this bunny has this blue body with like pink and purple and like a white face, and I think this is very similar to the trans flag. This is Shimmer the trans bunny. And so I walked around with Shimmer the trans bunny.
Wait, did you name the bunny?
I named him Shimmer.
Okay, all right.
And I walked around with Shimmer the trans bunny.
I wasn't sure if Shimmer the trans bunny was a thing.
No.
About. Okay.
It's just the trans flag.
Haven't you heard?
Seriously. It's on Tumblr.
Yeah.
So I walked around with Shimmer the trans bunny. And I kept introducing people to her, and I kept changing their pronouns. So I would say she, I'd say he. Yeah, I was kind of very constantly doing this, and I would put the trans bunny. It's just a little that size. I mean that's not very helpful for our listeners.
It's in Arash's head size.
Not everybody knows me. It's just a regular sized teddy bear.
Just a regular sized teddy bear little bunny that has the trans flag colors on it.
Yeah.
And I would hand the trans bunny to the person. I'd say, this is Shimmer, the trans bunny. I call her the trans bunny because she's the colors of the trans flag. And twice I handed it to a cis man, and the dude proceeded to turn the stuffed animal around and try to discern genitalia. Okay. Let's talk about why you just did that.
Yeah.
So it was this wonderful learning tool.
I feel like I would have done that to be funny.
Maybe to be funny. But what ended up happening, I had this one. I was interacting with people and showing Trans Bunny to people, and I had this one interaction. It was at lunch, and I'd said, you should never ask a trans person about their genitals, and I stand by that. And I got beaten up by these 5 straight people. They're like, but you don't tell us should, never. Well, I guess you should never, blah, blah. And well, what if I'm dating someone? I'm like, well, I mean, there's many conversations you should have before you go into the bedroom. Right. That's not what I meant. Yeah. That is not what I meant. 'Cause I don't walk around saying, hey, so tell me about your penis.
I wish you would. What's that like?
Yeah.
I look for any excuse to talk about my dick.
So how do does your labia get really dark when you're aroused or what? That's just not conversation.
It's bizarre, yeah.
Right? So there are certain things you just shouldn't ask in polite conversation, and just because someone is trans doesn't make it okay. Just someone is black doesn't mean you should touch their hair.
Yeah. Because
it's offensive.
Yeah.
And I think it's great to have Shimmer the trans bunny to begin those educational moments with, and not a human being with feelings, because Shimmer doesn't have feelings. They're a stuffed animal. They're not real.
Is that extremely common for people to start asking about your genitalia?
Yes, it's the first question everyone gets. Can we do just a 30-second? Because I don't want to make people more afraid by saying there's just things you don't ask, even though that's absolutely true.
Well, this is the place. This is the place where we're going to answer those.
Don't ask people about their genitals only because you don't ask people about their genitals. The first question at least a lot of trans feminine people get is, "Are you going to go all the way? Right. Are you going to be a complete? Are you going to get the surgery?" Because they can't get away from this idea. Society can't get away from the idea that gender lives in your genitalia.
Yeah.
That if I lose my penis, somehow I become a woman, and I'm not really a woman until But if I transition, I am not a woman just because I chopped my dick off, is the thing you hear too. So, really quickly, don't ask people about their genitals. Do ask about pronouns. And it's really as simple as saying, hey, what are your pronouns? Everyone has pronouns. Even cis people, you have your pronouns. They're he, him, or she, her, or whatever. So ask it the way you would want people to ask yours, or the way you would give yours. Hey, I'm Adam. My pronouns are whatever. I'm Arash. My pronouns are whatever.
Well, Adam, what are your pronouns?
They, them, or she, her.
Okay. That's how you prefer to be referred to.
Depends on the community and the context and the culture, but yes, in trans circles, I tend a lot more towards she, her, just because people understand the nuance of that identification, and I don't want to go out in everyday mainstream society calling myself she, her, and having people be like, what? And having to endure that.
Yeah.
So I use they just because it's non-gendered and it doesn't really affect me one way or the other.
Right.
So it really, and plus some people have an easier time calling people a neutral term than they do accepting that someone is a gender that they don't look like. And some people have no idea what non-binary genders even are, and they'd rather call me she and remember that I'm not a dude than have a nuance in the middle there. So
This is interesting. So what are your pronouns?
They, them.
Okay.
As I'm not bothered by she at all. And so when we do poly cocktails, there's a lot of people who I meet for the first time, and if the situation's appropriate, I'll state that my pronouns are they, them, but much of the time, middle conversation, so in points, I hear someone referring to me as she, I hear they, I hear she, and it's just ping, 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 ping. Yeah. I don't care.
Yeah,
it doesn't disturb me.
Yeah.
The only thing that disturbs me is lady. Because lady has specific connotations that are gendered in a very specific way.
Right.
Being ladylike means, you cross your legs at the ankle.
I suddenly imagine though someone would be like, lady, like an angry mechanic
cool.
or something.
That's totally cool.
Like, lady, calm down.
That's totally cool. That on the subway, that's a New York City subway thing.
Totally
lady, your bag's in my way.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that. But like,
funny.
good afternoon, ladies.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, I have boobs, and I don't like do a job of presenting as masculine because I'm not masculine.
Right.
Which is like, that's the other like edge of that coin.
And then some people who are non-binary and use they them pronouns hate being called sir or madam or any gendered term. They really only want the neutral term. So it really depends.
Yeah.
So
This is extra fascinating because it's a sign of it's a sign of respect to ask your pronouns. Like, and I feel the same way when people a lot of times are like kind of a little worried about asking my ethnicity, so they try to dance around a little bit,
right?
Because I almost seem ethnic non-specific,
right?
So I always tell people, like, you know what, they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm asking you stupid questions, I don't know what Persian means, and I'm like, no, I respect you more for asking rather than assuming. Mm-hmm. And I feel like what you're describing to me right now is a similar situation. Now, in a great deal of the default world, however, I imagine that's the reason people don't even know that asking your pronouns is an option, because a lot of people would get really offended if you ask, like, wait, I'm a man, what do you mean you're, I'm a girl, I can't believe you think it's... So, because that offensiveness exists in so much of default world, I imagine that that's something that a lot of people from the default world would be scared to ask.
The way to address that is to offer yours. Mm-hmm. So the same way, like, you don't know the name of, so you forgot someone's name, so you introduce your friend. This is Ella, and that person will be like, oh, I'm so-and-so. Yeah. If you see someone who looks pretty visibly gender non-conforming to you, there's a good chance that they know that, and they might be okay having their pronouns asked, and maybe not. So if you think it's pretty clear that someone is trans, and being aware that you may not know, clear may be a very relative subjective thing, you can say, what are your pronouns? Or if someone says, I am trans, or I am queer, or I'm gender non-conforming, oh, what are your pronouns? If you're unsure and don't want to offend someone, just say, hi, I am Arash. My pronouns are he, him. Like, you have pronouns too. Offer them, and people, if they're confused and they'll give you an answer. And if they are gender non-conforming, they'll really appreciate the ability that you opened with that. And you're communicating also, I am sensitive to queer people. I will respect your pronouns. I know that pronouns are a thing for people. So communicating that is very powerful. Yeah. So I guess recapping, rule number 1, don't ask about genitals. Number 2, pronouns are simple and straightforward, and people don't mind having them asked for, and you have them too.
Don't ask about sex acts. That's not appropriate.
Don't conflate sex with gender.
Okay, so the sex acts thing. Was it, I want to say it's from a blog called The Brain Lady. That's where I read this, the psychologist. It just stuck with me. I said that, like, the oldest part of our brains, like the sort of like the, the lizard brain, if you will. And it was describing why there's so many people posting food photos on social media. And what she was describing is that the oldest parts of our brains, and that's the part that is still the same, is never really quite evolved from this, is that when we're looking at everything in the world, we're always asking 3 questions. Will it kill me? can I eat it? Can I fuck it? Those three, that's all we're asking all day. So I imagine that's a contributing factor to why people's minds immediately go towards your sex organs.
Right.
Maybe they're not consciously thinking about fucking you. Their brain is still immediately wondering, can I fuck it?
Yeah, well, similar to how we put on clothes and sit in cubicles and manage that polite conversation without turning into orgies.
Yeah.
Humans transcend their animal nature all the time.
So where would I go to learn? I mean, is that something we could talk about here? Or where would I go to learn about how that works? Because I imagine, like, for example, if I'm interested in, if I'm asking the question, am I trans? One of my next questions would be like, well, how am I going to have sex? Because I really enjoy sex. Does hormone therapy mean that my penis is not going to work the same way? You know, the questions like that, I imagine, are things that lots of people are wondering.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a wide spectrum, but my question is not necessarily like I want everybody's answers on the table here, but where would somebody go to like learn more about information like this?
I would literally just go to Google and type in, I would like to learn more about transgender people, please. Use that sentence. I'm sure it works fine. And that's where this dual nature, like, I guess for me, number 3 on this like do's and don'ts list is people who are gender nonconforming or queer are often okay talking about gender, but they also get asked about it and they think about it a lot, and it's emotional labor to do that work for you.
Right.
So there's a fine line between doing your homework for you and giving you some homework help. And if you come with at least a modicum of knowledge or some really good questions that aren't the basic, like, well, how do you have sex? Do spend 15 minutes on Google. I bet you will more than triple your knowledge on how gender nonconformity expresses itself. And then most people you encounter will be happy to talk to you for ages about themselves. So that's why we're here, so we can talk about ourselves.
It's kind of like not going to your friend the doctor and asking them to look at your mole.
Yeah.
Because, like, come
am I
on,
supposed
I'm
to
not in
do
the
that?
office right now. I mean, like, if you can, you can, right? But, like, there's social norms, there's social cues, there's people. However, if you're wondering if you're interested in dating someone who's trans, and you're like, well, how will the sex work? It'd be great if you just ask the person.
Yeah.
Right.
Because everybody is different.
Where does that conversation come up? Like date number what?
I don't know. Whatever date you want to start talking about sex.
Okay, well, no, I mean, no, really here, it's the same as with any other person. Would you go to a person and assume just because they have a female body that they would respond the same as every other female?
Yeah.
That you, maybe you could guess
Yeah.
in bed, and many people do, and sometimes those guesses pan out, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
So if you're really trying to have conscious, mindful, good sex, you're going to have that conversation before you even get in bed, or as you're getting in bed, like, hey, where do you like to be touched? What do you like? Are there any places I shouldn't touch? Is there anything that's off the table for what we're doing tonight? Because the answer is going to vary. There is no, it's the big secret, the big lie. There is no one trans person or trans experience. Some people love having their genitals touched and they have zero genital dysphoria.
Yeah.
Some people are completely averse to it and don't even want to think about it. Some people are okay with it in certain contexts. Like some people are okay using their genitalia as long as they know that you aren't associating that with their gender. Like, oh, because you have a pussy, then clearly you're the person who must be lying back while I do things to you.
Yeah.
That association would probably turn someone off. But it might turn off a cis woman, too, for making assumptions about that genitalia equals gender roles, right? Yeah. So, I guess if you walk away from one thing, is that trans people are people, and talk to us about this aspect of our lived experience with just the opening that you're trying to be sensitive and you would like to learn more, and that you're not going to invalidate someone as soon as they tell you what their experience is like.
Yeah. I like this list, by the way. So we're at number 3. Is there a 4?
I don't know.
That 3 cover it?
I think that's pretty good. Basics. Don't ask about genitals. Do ask about pronouns. Don't ask about sex unless you're about to have it.
Yeah. Pretty good.
That's true. You know what? That makes sense. If you have gotten close enough with somebody where sex is going to be the next step, it's probably a good time to get into. You're probably invited into the house.
Right.
It's okay to have a
let me ask
conversation.
you now. So, Arash, how do you like to receive blowjobs? I just want to know for our friendship.
For the record, I'll happily share that information. That's why I host a podcast. But I understand that I'm not the norm.
I personally don't want to have that conversation.
Fuck. You really want to talk about that right now. God, it's fascinating. Yeah, there's again, I think, like we were saying earlier, though, we've barely scratched the surface on a lot of these topics. But I think I think a lot of the basic questions that I had sort of like swirling in my head is like, oh, these would be good topics to get into on today's episode. Kind of naturally, showed themselves.
Cool.
So that's been really cool.
Well done and well moderated.
Thank you.
You were two people who moderate energy frequently, and you've been doing it. You've been doing it well.
Thank you so much. And you guys have been absolutely wonderful
Thank
as
you.
well, and there's good energy in the room. Where, I mean, this is sort of such a vague and broad question, but where do you see sort of our community, the burn community, going as far as like this discussion that's happening right now? Do you see that it's, I know like, of course, like in the past couple of years, discussion about consent has like really taken like a front seat. Photography and consent has been a big thing in the past year. Do you guys see any trends about the discussions of gender and sexuality and where it's going in the burn community?
I will say that I think there's a difference between the burn and the burn community in the default world.
Absolutely.
To me, and this is anecdotal personal experience, the burn is a space of easing of, like, I don't know that I walk around with stress around my gender, but I don't feel it out there. And I, like, one of the things I like to do at the burn, at Utopia, and at other, like, parties and events is to put on wigs and wear long hair, for listeners, I have a buzz cut. So long purple or rainbow or pink fake locks, and explore like drag, explore femininity from kind of a drag perspective. And the reason I'm able to do that is because at the burn, everyone is costumed. Everyone is playing. They're playing with the way they present, and a lot of times there's a gendered element to that. And no one is making assumptions. And I truly feel like I can say, I'm poly, I can say I'm queer, I can say I'm genderqueer, I can say these are my pronouns. It doesn't matter. No one, when they're first seeing me, makes assumptions about me. But then, like, when we're at Red Wing, that's not the case. Yeah. That is a very particular energy, like, in the space that, now I'm just waxing poetic about Burning Man. But that it's a space of possibility and a space of a lack of judgment and a lack of expectations, that you put onto the other person.
Right.
That's my experience of gender at the burn. I think as far as the burner community, I find that there are different communities, right? There is no burner community, there's burner communities, even within San Diego. And I think that there are segments of the community that are really hip to gender. And there's segments of the community that are really not hip to gender. And there's, I go up to, I go up to Red Wing and I talk to someone, I think they're hip and they're not. I haven't been going to Red Wing recently, but, I don't know. I think it is the thing that is coming up. I think gender, exploring, like, understanding the binary and stepping out of it, stepping away from it, at least, or moving beyond it, is gaining momentum, has been gaining momentum across cultures.
Right.
And I think in the more conservative corners of this country, there's a very harsh backlash, happening. And so I don't know that there's a trend. I don't know that it's going to be the big topic, because honestly, I don't know there are enough of us that are not cis to demand it. But I think it's in the air.
Interesting. Have either of you experienced ego death? That's a big question.
In the DMT sense, but it didn't feel like death. It just felt like ego teleportation and ego diminishment and ego numbness. I'm not one of those folks who have had the ayahuasca-like experience of making the conscious choice die and then coming back. Interesting question, though.
Yeah. I've spoken about it on the show multiple times, but I mean, for me, the quote, is it Osho? It says, "We're all just God and drag." May have been. I'm not sure. But I don't know. To me, that's always made a lot of sense. And when I look at gender identity from that way, like, and I think that's a lot of what a burn is, a lot of burner community. It's this whole thing that we are, this human creature that we're walking around in. I mean, at the end of the day, when you strip away layers of sociology and biology, at the end of the day, we're just this thing.
Yeah.
I'd like to add on to that, and I think that's really important. Not but and. I think that it's also important. Like when you hear someone say, "I'm colorblind, I don't see race, I'm colorblind," that's all well and good, but race exists because people discriminate based on it, and a person who has a certain race is going to have a different lived experience than another person of a certain race. So if you're saying you don't see race, you're actually siding with oppression in the sense that you are closing yourself off to understanding people's differences.
Absolutely.
Similarly, I mean, don't let radical inclusion mean radical blindness. I mean, go for radical understanding. Try to understand everyone's lived experience and accept that we are equal, but not that we are equivalent. Not that we are the same. And I guess that kind of, my experience also with some aspects of the burner community is everyone accepts me, but not that many people understand me. Yeah. And so I love being accepted, and I also love being understood. So I spend time in different circles where I feel understood. And I would love, love, love for burner to be synonymous with hip to suffering, hip to privilege, hip to gender, hip to sexuality, hip to all these things. And I'm pretty sure that's an unreasonable expectation because, again, you can't generalize with a group of people. But yeah, really interrogate what inclusion means and look around your own circles and ask what inclusion means in your circles.
Right.
Yeah, I think Adam said before, gender is a joke, but it's also like deadly important. Yeah. And we can all play. We can all wear a dress. We can all wear fishnets. I can wear fishnets at the burn. That's the exciting thing for me, is that I can take on like femme presentation elements that I wouldn't be comfortable, with in the default world. We can all do this. Therefore, we're all okay and it's all cool. That's not the case, right? Ultimately, there's people who then want to move on and express themselves in the default world and get knocked on their ass for it by the default world. Yeah. And there's people who feel perfectly fine with the way they're expressing and are respected and don't get any pushback. Right.
There is, because this, by the way, this is pretty much the final topic that I had in my head before we started recording, that I'm like, I wonder if we're going to get to this, because it's with the, I had this thought before we started recording. It's like, speaking for myself as a spiritual angle, it's like gender and my ethnicity, my culture, all these things, they mean nothing, but then at the exact same time, they mean everything. And I guess the way that you just described it right now, Adam, like really, I think hit it right on the head. Like there's being accepted, and then there's being understood. And I imagine it's a combination of those two that becomes being loved.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Being seen.
Yeah. Being
seen.
What's I feel like it's when we put these layers together, that's you. I mean, like I can care for you and I can accept you and think you're an awesome person, but to really get a better grasp of where you're coming from and what your background is and what makes you who you are, takes it to another level. It's like looking at the painting in the gallery and saying, oh, that's really pretty, versus like understanding what sorts of paintbrushes the artist used and really understanding what it took to create this magnificent piece of art.
Especially, I think for that, I agree with you completely. For that to work, you need to have a definition of love that means understanding what it is you're loving. I could say that I'm in love with you. Yeah. Maybe I've only ever been watching you from behind a bush from 20 yards away.
Right.
Maybe I'm saying I love you, but maybe, just maybe, that concept is not what a lot of us would think of as love. I'm loving at you. Right, but I can't really be in love with you. I can be in love with the idea of you, but we couldn't be in love because we don't really understand the person that is that we're loving. And until then, it's just projection.
Because me loving your presence because I associate it with certain fun times and happy crowds is different than me loving you as an individual person and truly seeing you.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, it's like that's the kind of like the Jungian model of like romantic love. you start dating. You're looking at me like I'm crazy.
No,
you
look at you like you're great.
you
They look the same.
You start dating someone and you're not actually seeing that person. You've got just an abstract notion, and you're filling all the background in with what you want, that projection, you want. Right. And then some time passes and more of the reality actually takes hold. And I mean, in Jung, it's like you're seeing your dad, you're seeing your mom, but whatever. But like I like the notion that once you actually see the person rather than the projection, your ideal, you have a moment of crisis. You can either reject the person and keep going and searching for your ideal, or you can grow up, chuck the ideal, and be with the person who you can actually now finally understand.
Yeah.
It's not clear from your tone which you think is the proper path.
I personally just walk around with like plastic dolls that are my ideals, and I just, when a person starts falling short, I just replace them with a doll. So
I concepted out a music video with that same idea, basically. All right, guys, thank you so much. This has been absolutely perfect, and I look forward to having a sequel at some point in the future where we'll get into more like very, very specific topics. But you guys have been awesome, and thank you so much for being so candid and so open.
Thank you for the same. Wonderful.
Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, of course.
All right, well, there is. New episodes are up on the first and third Wednesdays of the month. We are on multiple podcasting platforms such as Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Spreaker. We're also on iHeartRadio now, so if you want to listen to the show, it is not hard to find. The Burner Podcast movement is made possible due to the efforts of various contributing producers as well as our regular staff, which include our network music editor, Navjeet Sarna, who is also the producer of Burner Podcast Presents Alkaline. Our online editor, Tori Massey, Alkaline producer, Amber Rose, contributing producer, Super Suze out of the Bay Area, recording engineer, Freckle, chief playa scientist, Ramiro Martinez, special projects manager, Paul McCarthy, executive producer, Meg King, and you, dear listener. Our intermission music is by Duckman. Check out his music over at duckmansd.bandcamp.com. The Burner Podcast theme song is America's Horse with No Name Remix, produced by Joe Man. Check out his music over at soundcloud.com/DJ Joe Man. So until next time, love and light and all that other crap. Good night.